A woman like you will never lead. My parents screamed after my promotion was denied. 10 years later, they walked into a boardroom and I was at the head. My father looked pale. You're the director? The shocking truth. So, you're the director? My father asked, voice cracking, eyes wide as he looked around the room and then back at me. Yes, I said calmly, flipping through my meeting notes. We'll be discussing the transition plan shortly. He blinked like he didn't understand English. My mother stood stiff beside him, clutching her purse like a shield. That was the first time they realized everything they said I couldn't do, I did. And more. I was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the youngest of 4 and the only daughter of Ralph and Denise Maynard. Growing up in that household was like living in a museum curated by misogyny. Everything had a place, especially people. My brothers were raised to lead. I was raised to understand my limits. My father ran a small family logistics business called Maynard Freight Solutions, and it was his pride and joy. From the time I could read, I watched him drag my brothers into meetings, teach them how to balance ledgers, talk to suppliers, and pitch clients. I'd sit in the next room, quietly making tea for whoever came over, then wash dishes afterward while the men talked business. At first, I thought it was normal. I genuinely believed that I just wasn't meant for the world they operated in. But something shifted in me during high school, especially once I started winning local business competitions and acing my economics classes. I remember once bringing home a regional trophy for a logistics simulation I'd led at a student event. My father didn't even look at it. You should be proud of your brothers, he said instead. They'll be running the company one day. That sentence stuck in my ribs like a splinter. Because I knew I was smarter than my brothers. Not in an arrogant way but in a quiet, observant, strategic kind of way. I watched the same problems they were taught to solve and figured out better answers in half the time. But none of that mattered. At Boston University, I majored in business and organizational management. I worked 2 part-time jobs, tutored on weekends, and still graduated in the top 5% of my class. When I landed a spot in a management trainee program at Thayer Industries, I thought maybe just maybe my parents would finally see me differently. I came home that weekend and shared the news over dinner. My brothers barely looked up from their plates. My mother raised an eyebrow. Thayer's big, she said, sipping wine. Too big, said my father. You'll get swallowed whole. That place isn't made for women who don't listen. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I think I'll be fine. He waved his hand. No one wants a woman who acts like she knows everything. A woman like you will never lead. Those words were a branding iron. They stayed with me every single day. Thayer Industries was a beast. A polished, shiny corporate animal with too many layers and not enough soul. The first couple of years were punishing. I was assigned to logistics operations, managing vendor relationships and internal distribution systems, which sounds dry but was the beating heart of the business. I learned quickly and I learned quietly. I took on night shifts, last-minute audits, and harsh inventory recons. When others made excuses, I made plans. But it didn't matter. Promotion after promotion, I was passed over. Always in favor of someone louder, someone with a Y chromosome, someone who played golf with the higher-ups. I remember vividly when I trained a new hire, Matt Driscoll. He was green as spring grass, full of dumb jokes and bravado. 6 months later, he was managing me. I held my tongue. I told myself, play the long game. Then came the big shot regional director of operations. I worked on my pitch for 6 weeks. Put together a streamlining proposal that saved the company 7 figures. Prepped harder than I had for anything in my life. They gave it to someone else. Aaron Blaine. He had just joined from a rival firm, barely knew our systems. But he had executive presence, they said. That night I cried. In a restroom stall, in the office, after hours. Quiet, angry tears. The next weekend, I went home and told my parents. My mother took a long sip of wine. That's what happens when you get too big for your britches. And my father, not missing a beat, added, "Some women follow well. You don't even do that." I didn't cry then. I went back to my hotel early, sat on the edge of the bed, and made a decision. I was done asking for permission. Over the next few years, I built myself from scratch. I took every advanced logistics and management course I could find online, evenings, weekends. I became Six Sigma certified. I consulted for local companies during my vacations, helping them overhaul their supply chains and operational flow. That's when I started getting noticed, first locally, then nationally. I left Thayer. By year 8, I'd built a consulting firm that was making nearly double my old salary. Argonova, a European logistics consortium expanding to the US, reached out with an offer: Director of East Coast Operations. Full autonomy. Big budget. Bigger challenge. I moved to New York City and took the role without hesitation. I was sitting in my Midtown office when I got the email from corporate. Thayer was forming a strategic partnership with us. A delegation would be coming in for an integration review. Guess who was on the delegation? Ralph Maynard. My father. Thayer had acquired Maynard Freight Solutions a year prior. Turns out, the family business had been bleeding money, and Thayer scooped them up during a rough quarter. My father, stubborn as ever, took a consulting title to save face. And now, Thayer was sending him along for what was essentially a dog and pony show. They didn't know I was director. And I didn't tell them. I didn't sleep much the night before the meeting. Not out of nerves, I'd led dozens of high-stakes negotiations by then, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying their words. A woman like you will never lead. They had no idea I was the one in charge of the East Coast division. And I wasn't going to tell them. I wanted them to see it with their own eyes. I wanted it to settle in their chests like a weight they couldn't shake. The morning of the meeting, I dressed deliberately in a gray tailored suit, black pumps, clean lines, no frills. Professional, sharp. Neutral. I didn't need to prove I belonged. I did. I just needed to stay focused. I walked into the 37th floor boardroom early, as always. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan, and a long walnut table polished to a mirror shine. I set up the presentation slides, organized the printed materials, then sat at the head of the table. I didn't pace. I didn't fidget. I just waited. At exactly 10 a.m., the delegation arrived. There was Stephen Krall, still with his cheap smile confidence, now VP of East Coast Relations for Thayer. A few other familiar names from my old days there filed in behind him, chattering and laughing. Then they walked in. My parents. Ralph wore the same kind of suit he'd worn to every church service and funeral since I was a kid, too boxy, slightly outdated, but pressed within an inch of its life. His walk was slower than I remembered. He had gained weight. Age had not been kind to him. Denise stood a step behind, lips tight, eyes already scanning the room like she didn't want to be there. They didn't notice me at first. They were mid-conversation with someone else, talking logistics forecasts and projected redundancies. Then Stephen gestured to the head of the table and said, "Our Director of East Coast Operations will walk us through the next phase." I stood up. Ralph stopped mid-sentence. Denise froze beside him. My father's jaw twitched. "You're the director?" he asked. There it was. The pause. The disbelief. Like he had just seen a ghost wearing my face. "Yes," I said. "Let's begin." The rest of the room settled into their seats, oblivious to the silent war unfolding between my gaze and his. I opened the presentation, launched into the efficiency metrics, vendor transitions, and workforce impact projections. I walked them through the entire partnership rollout plan, phased integration, department consolidation, new leadership structures. Every decision, every line on those slides, had my name behind it. I wasn't performing. I was leading. My parents didn't say a word during the entire meeting. My mother sat with her hands clasped too tightly, knuckles pale. My father kept his eyes on the printouts like he was reading scripture. I kept my tone even, my language precise, my pace steady. This wasn't revenge. This was reality. And they were being forced to live in it. When the meeting adjourned, people started shaking hands, gathering their things, making polite small talk. Ralph and Denise lingered. He stepped toward me like he wanted to say something. But there was hesitation in him, like the words were too heavy to lift. Denise looked at me like I was a stranger. "You've changed," she said finally, her voice low. "No," I replied, holding her eyes. "I just stopped asking for permission." She flinched at that just slightly. But I saw it. My father didn't say anything. He just stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked out. The silence after they left was thicker than the meeting had been. I stood alone at the head of the boardroom, sunlight pouring through the windows behind me. My heart wasn't racing. There was no vindication dancing through my veins. Just a stillness. A quiet satisfaction. It wasn't that I needed to win. It was that I needed to be right, and prove that being right and capable was enough. And it was. After they left the boardroom, I stayed behind, letting the weight of the meeting sink into the polished wood and glass around me. The other executives had long since filtered out, and the assistant brought in a fresh carafe of coffee. I thanked her, but didn't pour a cup. I just stood there, hands on the edge of the table, staring at the door my parents had exited through. For years, I used to imagine what it would feel like to confront them in a moment like this where the balance of power shifted and I held all the cards. I imagined anger, vindication, even triumph. But it didn't feel like any of those things. It felt quiet. Hollow, almost. Not empty in a sad way, but in a cleared-out sort of way, like someone had finally taken out the garbage after years of letting it pile up. And I didn't miss it. Over the next few weeks, the partnership between Argonova and Thayer started moving into phase 2, which meant I was regularly interfacing with Thayer's transition team and by extension, Ralph. Not often. But enough. He was quieter now. Worn around the edges. During our first follow-up meeting, he didn't even try to assert himself. He sat 2 seats away, barely spoke unless spoken to, and didn't even look me in the eye. The man who used to call me too mouthy to manage a bake sale now couldn't even ask for a document without clearing his throat first. Denise wasn't part of the transition. I found out later she'd flown home after that first meeting and hadn't returned to the city. My brothers, all of whom were at one point supposed to inherit Maynard Freight, had since gone into other industries. One had started selling insurance in Trumbull, another was flipping houses in Waterbury. Dean, the oldest, still lived at home and managed what was left of their storage yard before it got shut down entirely. That legacy they all clung to? It had already crumbled by the time I took the director's chair. They just didn't want to admit it. One Friday afternoon, after a particularly long transition workshop, I passed my father in the hallway outside the executive lounge. It was just the two of us. No handlers. No corporate masks. He nodded at me, awkward and unsure, like we were distant relatives at a funeral. "You built something," he said, voice low. I waited, not sure what to say. Not ready to comfort him. Not after everything. "I didn't expect that," he continued. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "No. You didn't." He looked down, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he did when he was thinking too hard. "I was raised to believe certain things. About what men do. About what women can't." "You raised me that way too," I said. He nodded. Slowly. "I know. And I was wrong." There was no great swelling of music. No hug. No tearful reconciliation. Just those 4 words in the hallway of a building I ran. I gave a single nod back. That was all I had to give. Word eventually spread through the Argonova leadership circle that I had connections to the old Maynard firm. A few people asked. Most didn't. I didn't go out of my way to explain the family history. I wasn't ashamed of it, I just didn't need it to be part of my narrative anymore. The work became everything. I thrived in it. Supply chain architecture, vendor negotiations, crisis management. It wasn't just spreadsheets and process maps. It was a strategy. It was about finding the most efficient way through a maze of moving parts and personalities. And unlike my years at Thayer, here I wasn't just tolerated. I was respected. Trusted. Listened to. That, more than anything, was the real difference. I wasn't banging on locked doors anymore. I had my own keys and I was building more doors for other women to walk through. About 2 months after the initial boardroom meeting, I received a formal invitation to attend an industry summit in Chicago. It was an honor. Argonova had been nominated for an innovation award under my leadership. The summit would be broadcast, and executives from Thayer and dozens of other partners would be in attendance. My assistant, Leanne, handed me the itinerary and said, "You're going to want to sit in the front row for this one. You're the last speaker of the day." I scanned the list. There, halfway down the schedule, was a panel called Legacy in Logistics, Family Businesses and the Future. And listed among the panelists? Ralph Maynard, former owner, Maynard Freight Solutions. I raised an eyebrow. I hadn't seen that name on anything official in weeks. Looked like Thayer was still trotting him out for nostalgia value, a faded emblem of small-town grit. A relic. When the day came, I sat through that panel with a blank face. Ralph spoke softly, mostly in vague generalities about tradition and foundations. He never mentioned me. Never mentioned the company's collapse. Just a carefully scrubbed version of the truth, one that wouldn't rock the boat too much. It was fine. Then I took the stage, and the difference in tone was immediate. I spoke about scale, digitization, international vendor networks, and inclusive leadership. I outlined real numbers, real impact, and tangible outcomes. I didn't need to raise my voice or toss in buzzwords. I just told the truth of what I had built. Afterward, I caught my father standing near the back of the room. Watching. Alone. No one was talking to him. No one seemed to recognize him anymore. I gave him a polite nod. He didn't return it. Back in New York, things moved faster. Argonova was expanding its U.S. presence aggressively, and with the success of our East Coast operations, I was now involved in the westward expansion strategy. My calendar was a color-coded wall of back-to-back meetings, advisory calls, investor briefings, and international conference calls. It was exactly the kind of life I once imagined, structured, high-stakes, independent, respected. The hours were long, but they weren't draining like they used to be. When you're building something that's yours, even the late nights feel different. But despite the whirlwind of growth and momentum, my family still lingered in the background like dust you can't quite scrub off no matter how shiny the surface gets. About a month after the Chicago summit, I got a call from my oldest brother, Dean. We hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years. I was in the back of a town car, heading to a supplier site visit in Newark, when I saw his name flash on my phone. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I said, voice even. "Hey, listen, this is a little awkward." I already knew what he wanted. He cleared his throat. "Dad's been, down. Business stuff didn't really pan out. You probably know that. He's not well. Not sick, just old. I guess. Tired." I stayed quiet. "He talks about you sometimes. Mostly around Mom, though. You know how she gets." "Why are you calling?" I asked flatly. Dean sighed. "They asked me to. Mom wants to know if you'll come home for Dad's birthday. It's 75. Big one. They're having dinner." I stared out the window, watching warehouses and billboards slide by. "Why would I do that?" I asked. He didn't argue. He didn't guilt-trip me. To his credit, he just said, "I don't know. Thought you should hear it." I said I'd think about it. I didn't. The thing is, I didn't hate them. Not anymore. That emotion had burned itself out years ago, scorched into ash by time and distance. What remained was indifference. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's the absence of care. And that's what they'd raised in me. Still, curiosity is a funny thing. A few days later, I found myself scrolling local news sites from Fairfield County, reading up on small business closures, town politics, and the odd community spotlight. It didn't take long to find an article on Maynard Freight, once a staple of Bridgeport's local logistics scene, now defunct. The article was polite but clear: the business had been swallowed and shelved. The physical offices had closed 6 months prior. There was a photo attached, taken years ago, of my father and brothers standing proudly in front of the building. No mention of me. No trace of my years working quietly behind the scenes, reorganizing their chaotic inventory system during summer breaks, building process maps that saved them thousands even as a teenager. Erased. Deliberately. The call from Dean rattled something, though. Enough that a week later, I found myself driving toward Bridgeport. Not for the party god, no, but to see the place. To look it in the eye one last time. Closure, maybe. Just enough to seal off that last unfinished corner of myself. The building was still standing, though boarded up. The sign Maynard Freight Solutions had been removed, but you could still see the outline of the letters, faded into the facade. The lot was overgrown. One of the windows was cracked. It looked small. So much smaller than I remembered. I parked across the street and sat in silence for a while. At some point, someone knocked on the window of my car. It was a man in his late 40s, wearing a county badge. Probably part of the property inspection team. "You hear about the auction?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just looking." He nodded. "Shame. This place used to be something." He had no idea who I was. That felt appropriate. Later that week, a letter arrived at my Manhattan apartment. Handwritten. No return address. I almost didn't open it, but the handwriting was familiar. Stiff and overly formal. Denise. Inside was one sheet of lined paper. Neat cursive. "We heard you came by the office. Ralph hasn't said much since the summit. I don't know what he expected. You've changed everything. We can't keep up. We were never taught how. I don't expect anything from you. But I thought you should know we see it now. Even if we never said it right." Mom, I didn't cry. Not even close. But I did fold the letter and place it in my desk drawer instead of the trash. Not forgiveness. Not forgetting. Just a record. That week, I launched a new internal initiative at Argonova Mentorship for underrepresented women in mid-tier management. We paired them with executives across departments, and I personally oversaw the pilot cohort. I saw myself in a few of them, especially Janelle, a quiet, brilliant logistics coordinator from Poughkeepsie who constantly downplayed her work. I pulled her into my office after one presentation and said, "Stop apologizing before you speak." She blinked. "Sorry," I raised my eyebrows. She smirked. "Right. Okay. I'm working on it." And she did. The emails from Dean came sporadically after that. Sometimes short updates, sometimes odd attempts at reconnection. I never responded. He seemed to understand. Once, he sent a photo of our parents' old house. The shutters had been painted. The lawn was overgrown. A piece of the gutter had come loose. "Looks like things are falling apart," he wrote. "Don't suppose you'd ever want to fix it up?" I didn't reply. But I did look at the photo for a long time. Not out of nostalgia. But because it reminded me just how far I'd come. I didn't go to Ralph's birthday dinner. Dean followed up twice, then stopped. I think they got the message. Still, word spread. I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years, neighbors, teachers, even one of my brother's ex-wives. All of them suddenly curious, overly warm, and hinting at vague memories of always knowing you were going to do something special. It would have been laughable if it weren't so transparent. That's when it occurred to me, my revenge had already happened. It didn't need to be planned, or theatrical, or cruel. The satisfaction was in the fact that it had happened while they weren't looking, and now they were forced to live in the world I helped build, a world that no longer revolved around them. But fate, it seemed, wasn't quite done with the irony. About 3 months later, I was invited to sit on a panel at a Connecticut business forum in Stamford. The theme was reinvention in regional supply chains. I almost declined. It was local, small scale compared to my usual circuit, but something made me accept. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe something else. The forum was held in the ballroom of a modest business hotel, packed with local logistics companies, mid-tier manufacturing reps, and a few legacy business owners clinging to relevance. I recognized a few faces. One in particular stopped me cold. My father. He wasn't on a panel this time. He was sitting near the back, not in a suit, but in a worn button-up and khakis, with a notepad in front of him. Listening. The years had changed him. His shoulders were rounded now. His hands, once firm and commanding, looked softer. Older. I stepped onto the stage. The moderator gave me a warm introduction. A few people clapped. My father did not. I spoke for 20 minutes about automation, resilience, the importance of flexible supplier models, and yes, about inclusive leadership. I didn't mention my background. I didn't need to. My reputation in the room spoke for itself. After the session, as the crowd milled around and asked questions, I saw him approach. He waited patiently behind a small group, holding his notepad like a shield. When everyone else dispersed, he stepped forward. "Hi," he said quietly. I gave a polite nod. "Dad. I didn't expect you to be here," he said. "You came to a logistics forum in Connecticut," I said. "I live here." He chuckled once, but it faded quickly. "You were good. On stage, I mean. You always spoke well. Even when you were young." There was a silence between us. Heavy, but not bitter. He looked around, then back at me. "I don't have the business anymore. I guess you know that." "I do." He nodded. "I didn't listen. Not to you. Not when it mattered." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Then, almost nervously, he asked, "Are you hiring?" The words hung in the air like a siren. I didn't blink. "Not in a role you'd qualify for." There it was. Clean. Direct. Not cruel but exact. He swallowed. "Fair. Take care of yourself," I said, and stepped past him, heels clicking against the ballroom floor like punctuation. A week later, back in New York, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten again. Denise this time, but different. Handwriting is smaller, more delicate. "We heard about the forum. I won't ask for a job. I won't ask for a second chance. I just want you to know, when people talk about you in town, they don't talk about the business anymore. They talk about you. The one who got out. The one who made it. You didn't just lead. You left us behind. And maybe that's what real leadership is." Mom, there was no return address this time. I folded the letter, slid it into the same drawer as the last one, and locked it. Now, I walk into boardrooms without hesitation. My name opens doors. My voice carries weight. And when I sit at the head of a table, no one questions how I got there. And sometimes, when I mentor younger women, especially the ones whose ambition has been treated like a flaw, I tell them, you don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to prove anything to people who've already decided not to see you. Just outlast them. Outgrow them. And when they walk into the room one day and realize it's your room now, that's all the answer you'll ever need. That was my revenge. Not their pain. Not their silence. just my success. And the fact that they had to witness it powerless to stop it was enough.